Welcome back to Classic Mysteries at Midnight. I'm Lawrence, and wherever you are tonight, curled up in Toronto, sipping tea in Tokyo, or listening under the stars in Cape Town, do drop a comment and tell me where you're joining from. It means the world. Tonight we have something rather special. An original Hercule Poirot story I've written in the pure Agatha Christie tradition. It is 1927. The war is a raw memory. Secrets are currency. And one man is about to discover that knowledge can be more dangerous than any weapon. Chapter 1. A letter from the past. The rain over London that October afternoon was the color of old pewter, tapping politely at the windows of 56B Whitehaven mansions as though requesting admittance on behalf of the coming winter. Inside, a small coal fire hissed in the grate, and Hercule Poirot, very correct in a charcoal gray suit and a waistcoat the shade of ripe damson, was arranging his morning correspondence with the precision of a man laying out chess pieces. There were 7 letters in all. 6 could be answered by his secretary, Miss Lemon, with her admirable efficiency. The 7th was different. It lay alone on the green leather blotter, an oblong of heavy cream-laid paper that seemed to carry its own chill. The address had been typed on a machine with a slightly defective E that rose half a line above its fellows. Poirot noticed such things. They were the fingerprints of the soul. He slit the envelope with a silver knife and drew out a single sheet. To Monsieur Hercule Poirot. You once saved my life in Belgium, 1916. I now beg you to save it again. Come to Braidwood Chase, Buckinghamshire, this Friday. A man will die if you do not. Bring no police. Trust no one here. Your grateful debtor, Major Alistair Hawthorne, Retid Poirot, placed the letter flat between his palms as though warming it. The paper was expensive, the typing military in its spacing, the message itself terse to the point of brutality. He closed his eyes and allowed memory to do its work. Belgium, 1916. A shell-shocked officer carried out of a burning estaminet near Poperinghe. Identity discs missing, one arm already lost to gangrene. Poirot, then a refugee policeman with nothing but stubbornness and a borrowed revolver, had arranged the ambulance, forged the papers, bribed the driver. The man had lived. Poirot had never known his name. There had been too many that night, and now, 11 years later, the debt was being called in. He rose, crossed to the window, and looked down upon the wet street where taxis hissed past like black beetles. Retirement, he reflected, was a luxury granted only to those who had never truly been needed. He touched the perfect wings of his mustache, a gesture half reassurance, half battle preparation, and reached for the telephone. Miss Lemon, he said when the incomparable woman appeared, you will cancel my appointments for Friday and Saturday. I am summoned to the country. Very good, Monsieur Poirot. Shall I lay out the new gray overcoat with the astrakhan collar? You anticipate me, as always. At Marylebone Station on Friday, the air smelled of coal smoke and fried kippers. Poirot traveled first class, naturally, yet even there the carriage was crowded with commercial travelers and a bishop who snored gently beneath the Times. Poirot sat very upright, gloved hands resting on the head of his cane, watching England unroll beyond the window like a watercolor left in the rain. Buckinghamshire in late autumn is a county of bruised golds and sullen greens. The branch line train deposited him at a tiny halt where rooks quarreled in the elms in a single taxi, an ancient Daimler with a patched hood. Waited like a faithful dog. The driver touched his cap. Braidwood Chase, sir? Major Hawthorne said to look out for a foreign gentleman with a big mustache. Begging your pardon, sir. Poirot permitted himself a small smile. The mustache, it is magnificent, n'est-ce pas? One does one's best. They bowled along lanes overhung with beech and hazel, the hedges heavy with travelers' joy. Now and then the Daimler lurched through puddles that reflected a sky the color of tarnished pewter. At last iron gates appeared, topped with the crest of a mailed fist clutching a quill. Appropriate, Poirot thought, for a house of secrets. The drive curved through parkland where deer lifted their heads to stare with liquid suspicion. And then the house itself. Red Jacobean brick mellowed to the shade of dried blood, tall chimneys, mullioned windows that caught the failing light like eyes. Ivy cloaked the west wing so thickly that the walls seemed furred. A single lamp already burned above the porte-cochere. Major Alistair Hawthorne was waiting on the steps. He had changed since 1916. The hair was iron gray now, the face carved into harder lines, the left sleeve of his tweed jacket pinned neatly to the shoulder. Yet the eyes were the same, pale blue, unflinching, the eyes of a man who had looked at hell and refused to blink. Monsieur Poirot. The major's handshake was firm despite the missing arm. You came. I knew you would. One does not ignore a debt of life, Poirot replied. Though I confess, mon ami, the circumstances are mysterious. They are deadly, the major said quietly. Come inside. The others are waiting. They passed beneath a stone archway carved with the date 1604 and entered a hall paneled in dark oak. A log fire blazed in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. Above it hung a tapestry of Diana hunting that had probably shocked the Puritans. The air smelled of applewood and beeswax and something else. Tension, perhaps, or old fear. 6 people rose as they entered the drawing room. Poirot took them in with one swift professional glance, cataloging faces the way another man might note cards in a hand. First, Sir Reginald Vance himself, seated in a high-backed wheelchair beside the fire. 62 years old, once powerfully built, now shrunken by the stroke that had stolen his legs 18 months earlier. His head was leonine, the hair thick and white, the eyes behind thick spectacles a cold, glittering gray. A silver speaking tube lay across his lap like some obscene pet. At his right hand stood Dr. Lydia Trevelyan, tall, cool, dark-haired, dressed in severe navy with a single string of pearls. 38, Poirot guessed, the sort of woman who could break a code or a man's heart with equal detachment. Captain Felix Carver lounged against the mantel, 35, handsome in the careless way of men who have never been refused anything. Fair hair slicked back, cavalry mustache, the knot of his tie a fraction too daring. His eyes flicked over Poirot with lazy amusement. Miss Daphne Blaine was perhaps 29, small, blonde, wearing mourning black that made her look younger still. She had the wide violet eyes of a child in a fairy tale who has opened the forbidden door. Sir Reginald's ward, the major had murmured in the hall, heiress to whatever fortune remained. Professor Otto Kessler stood a little apart, a thin, stooped figure with a scholar's dome of a forehead and gold-rimmed spectacles. 55, German by birth, naturalized British since 1919. His hands moved constantly, long musician's fingers worrying at a loose button. Last came Mrs. Eleanor Marchbanks, the housekeeper, rigid in rustling black bombazine. 48, perhaps 50, grief had etched her face into permanent disapproval. Her husband had been one of the cipher unit found hanging in this very house in 1920. Suicide, the coroner said. Mrs. Marchbanks had never believed it. 6 suspects, Poirot thought, before a crime has even been committed. How very convenient. Sir Reginald's voice rasped through the speaking tube like a saw on bone. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I am told you are the greatest detective in Europe. One endeavors to give satisfaction, Poirot murmured, bowing. Then satisfy me this, Sir Reginald said. In 1918, someone in this room sold British naval codes to German intelligence. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, died as a result. For 9 years I have carried the proof. Tonight at midnight in the cipher room I will reveal the traitor's name. After that, Scotland Yard may do as it pleases. A silence fell so complete that the crackle of the fire sounded like gunshots. Captain Carver gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Really, sir? Must we rake over old graves? The war's been done this long time." "The dead are not done with us, Captain," Dr. Trevelyan said quietly. Professor Kessler removed his spectacles and polished them with a trembling hand. "And if the traitor chooses not to wait until midnight?" Sir Reginald's smile was thin and terrible. "Then I die content, Professor, knowing the truth will still be told." Major Hawthorne stepped forward. "Dinner is served in half an hour. Perhaps we might continue this discussion afterwards." As the company moved towards the dining room, Poirot lingered by the fire. Sir Reginald wheeled his chair close enough that the heat must have scorched his knees. "You wonder why I summoned you," the old man whispered through the tube. "It is not to solve a murder, little Belgian. It is to prevent one. I am already a dead man. My doctors give me weeks. But I will not go to my grave with this stain upon my soul. One of them will try to silence me before midnight. Stop them if you can, if not, avenge me." Poirot met the fierce gray eyes. "You have my word, Sir Reginald." The old man nodded once and wheeled himself away. In the hall, Major Hawthorne touched Poirot's sleeve. "The cipher room is at the far end of the west wing," he said in a low voice. "Oak door, Yale lock, only one key. Sir Reginald wears it on a chain around his neck. Windows barred since wartime. No one has entered that room in 5 years except Sir Reginald himself." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A locked room in which to reveal a traitor. How very appropriate. Dinner was announced. They went in to table beneath the painted gaze of long-dead Vances, and the candles flickered like nervous conspirators. Outside, the rain redoubled, drumming on the leaded windows as though the house itself were weeping for what was to come. Midnight, Poirot reflected, as he took his place between Miss Blaine and Dr. Trevelyan, was still 3 hours away. Plenty of time for someone to kill. Chapter 2. Death in the Cipher Room. The dinner had been exquisite and poisonous. Consommé Olga, sole à la Diepoise, a saddle of mutton that bled pink when carved, and with every course the conversation grew thinner and the silences longer. Sir Reginald had taken only a little soup, wheeled away early by Mrs. Marchbanks. The rest sat trapped by politeness and dread, listening to the grandfather clock in the hall strike each quarter as though counting down to an execution. At 10:30, Poirot excused himself, pleading the traveler's need for rest. In truth, he wished to prowl. He moved through the darkened corridors like a small, neat shadow, noting which doors were ajar, which floorboards betrayed a creak where the lamps had been turned low to discourage wandering. The west wing felt colder than the rest of the house. The air carried a faint metallic tang, as though secrets themselves had begun to rust. At 11:39, he paused outside the cipher room. The heavy oak door was closed, no line of light beneath. He placed his ear to the panel. Nothing. He tried the handle. Locked, of course. Satisfied, he returned to his room, set his traveling clock for 10 minutes to midnight, and lay fully dressed upon the bed, eyes closed, every sense alert. At 11:57, there came a soft knock. Major Hawthorne stood in the doorway, his face the color of candle wax. "Sir Reginald has gone to the cipher room alone," he whispered. "Said he must prepare the evidence without distraction. I offered to sit with him. He refused. I don't like it, Poirot." "Nor do I," Poirot replied, already reaching for his coat. "Come." They walked quickly, the Major's boots loud on the parquet, Poirot's patent leather pumps silent. Behind them, doors opened. One by one, the others appeared. Dr. Trevelyan in a dark dressing gown, Captain Carver fastening his collar, Miss Blaine clutching a candle that shook light across her frightened face, Professor Kessler blinking like a disturbed owl. Even Mrs. Marchbanks materialized from the shadows, keys jangling at her waist. They reached the west corridor as the grandfather clock began to strike midnight. 12 slow, deliberate notes. On the final stroke, a sound reached them. Brief, sharp, unmistakably a cry cut off in the throat. Captain Carver threw himself at the cipher room door. It did not budge, locked, bolted from within. "Sir Reginald!" the major shouted, hammering with his one fist. "Open the door!" Silence. Poirot's voice cut through the rising panic like a blade. "Stand aside!" He examined the lock, the jamb, the heavy iron keyhole. No key on the outside. He pressed his eye to the hole. Only darkness. "Fetch something to break it down," Carver urged. "No," Poirot said sharply. "We damage nothing until we understand. Major, you are strongest. Your shoulder to the panel, but gently." Hawthorne braced himself and charged. The old oak shuddered but held. A second blow, a third. On the fourth, the lock assembly tore free and the door swung inward. They crowded on the threshold and stopped as though turned to stone. Sir Reginald Vance sat slumped forward over the green baize desk, head resting on his forearms as if asleep. But the silver speaking tube had fallen to the floor, and from beneath his left shoulder blade protruded the hilt of a narrow stiletto dagger. Blood had spread in a dark fan across the desk, dripping steadily onto the turkey carpet. The electric lamp on the desk cast a cruel white pool over the scene. In its glare, the blood looked almost black. The windows were fastened tight, iron bars beyond the glass untouched by rust or disturbance. The fireplace was a mere slit, far too narrow for a human body. And the door, they had just forced it, had been locked and bolted from the inside. Professor Kessler found his voice first, a whisper in German. "Unmöglich." Dr. Trevelyan stepped forward, professional instincts overriding shock. She touched the carotid, lifted the wrist, then straightened. "Dead. Less than 5 minutes, I should say." Miss Blaine gave a small, broken cry and sank to her knees. Poirot moved into the room with the care of a man entering a minefield. He touched nothing, merely looked. On the desk, beside the body, lay an empty manila folder. Stenciled across it in red ink were the words, "Traitor. Evidence." The folder was open. It contained nothing at all. Poirot's gaze traveled upward. A faint haze hung in the air, and with it an odor. Delicate, insidious, unforgettable to anyone who had served in Flanders. "Bitter almonds," he murmured. Dr. Trevelyan's head snapped round. "Cyanide?" "Prussic acid, certainly, yet there is no glass, no file." He bent closer to the corpse, careful not to disturb the position. "And this dagger, it is not English work, Italian, I think, a misericordia." Major Hawthorne's face drained entirely of color. "That dagger," he said hoarsely, "hung on my study wall, a souvenir from Cambrai. It was there yesterday." Captain Carver swore under his breath. Poirot straightened, eyes glittering. "Then we have a pretty problem, mes amis. A man stabbed in a room locked and bolted from within. A weapon that traveled through solid walls. Documents vanished into thin air. And a scent of cyanide where no cyanide is to be found." He turned to the stunned circle in the doorway. "Someone in this house has achieved the perfect murder. But perfection, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And Hercule Poirot beholds rather well." Outside, the rain had stopped. In the sudden hush, they could hear water dripping from the eaves, slow, steady, patient. Like blood. Chapter 3. The house that secrets built. Dawn came late to Braidwood Chase, creeping through the mullioned windows in a reluctant gray wash that made the house look older than its stones. Poirot had not slept. He stood now in the cipher room, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the scene with the calm intensity of a painter judging his canvas. The body had been removed to the old billiard room, the blood soaked up with sawdust by a silent gardener. Yet the room still felt occupied by death. Inspector Japp arrived at 8:30, driven down from London in a police Wolseley that scattered gravel like buckshot. He took one look at Poirot's expression and groaned. Locked room, impossible disappearance of papers, and a house full of ex-spies. You might at least have waited until after breakfast, Poirot. Murder is indifferent to the convenience of Scotland Yard, mon cher Japp. Come, see what we have. Together they examined every inch. The door showed only the fresh scars of the forced entry. The bolt on the inside was old but solid, its screws undisturbed. The windows were hermetically sealed. The bars outside had been painted over so often that a fly could not have squeezed between them. The chimney was a mere throat of brick, blackened and far too narrow. Even the floorboards rang solid when stamped. Japp scratched his head. Either your killer's a ghost or he walked through walls. Neither, Poirot said softly. He used the door like any honest assassin, only not in the way we imagine. The local doctor, a nervous young man named Fairchild, confirmed the time of death between 11:58 and 12:02. The dagger had entered beneath the shoulder blade, severing the subclavian artery, death almost instantaneous. No trace of cyanide in the mouth or stomach, yet the almond smell lingered faintly near the desk. By 10 o'clock, the 6 residents were assembled in the morning room, pale, sleepless, each nursing private terror beneath a veneer of civility. Mrs. Marchbanks had provided coffee no one drank. Poirot entered last, immaculate in dove gray, a white carnation in his buttonhole as though attending a wedding rather than an inquest. Mesdames, Messieurs, he began, placing his gloves neatly on the table. We proceed on the assumption that one of you is a murderer. This is not pleasant, but it is necessary. I will speak to each of you alone. The rest will remain here under the eye of Sergeant Beddoes. Beddoes, a large man with the mournful expression of a bloodhound, took up station by the door. Major Hawthorne was first. He sat rigidly, the empty sleeve of his jacket pinned with almost military precision. I did not kill him, he said at once, though God knows I hated him enough. In March 1918, my battalion was slaughtered because someone sold our positions. I lost this, he touched the empty sleeve, and 400 boys who trusted me. If I had killed Vance, I would have looked him in the eye while I did it. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And last night? I was in my room until 11:57. I heard Sir Reginald wheel past my door at 11:45. He often worked late. When the clock began striking midnight, I grew uneasy and went to fetch you. Next, Dr. Lydia Trevelyan. She lit a Turkish cigarette with steady fingers and regarded Poirot through a veil of smoke. Sir Reginald was a brilliant brute, she said. He treated us like laboratory animals. But murder? I break codes, Monsieur Poirot, not hearts. Though I confess I should like to have broken his. Where were you at midnight? Reading in bed. George Bernard Shaw. I heard the clock strike, then nothing until the Major's shouting. Captain Felix Carver sauntered in, attempting nonchalance and almost succeeding. Rotten business, he said, lighting his own cigarette from the stub of hers. I owed the old man 30,000 quid, casino debts, don't you know? Dead men don't done one what? But I'm not fool enough to murder for it. Too many witnesses. And your movements? Playing patience in the smoking room until about 10 to 12. Then I went up, heard the commotion from the top of the stairs. Miss Daphne Blaine came in trembling, eyes red-rimmed. He was going to disinherit me, she whispered. He found out about Felix and me. Said no ward of his would marry a fortune hunter. But I didn't kill him, I swear. I was in my room all night. Professor Otto Kessler entered last of the morning batch, hands twisting together like pale snakes. In 1918, I was the enemy, he said quietly. Perhaps Sir Reginald decided after all these years that I was the traitor. Perhaps he was right to fear me. But I did not kill him. At midnight, I was in the library trying to find a book to quiet my nerves. I heard nothing until you all ran past. Mrs. Marchbanks refused to sit. She stood, arms folded tight across her bombazine bosom. My husband died because of what went on in that room, she said, voice flat with old grief. Hanged himself from the banisters in 1920. They called it cowardice. I call it murder by inches. If I had wanted vengeance, I would have taken it long ago. Poirot thanked her gravely and dismissed her. When they were alone again, he turned to Jap. Each has motive enough for 3 murders. Each claims to have been elsewhere at the vital moment. And yet the room was locked from within. The key on the corpse, the bolt shot. It is, as my friend Hastings would say, a proper facer. Jap snorted. Your friend Hastings would say a lot of things, most of them daft. What do we actually know? That someone is lying very cleverly indeed, Poirot replied, and that the smell of bitter almonds is the first crack in the perfect crime. He stood at the window, gazing out at the sodden garden. Arrange for the fingerprints, Jap, and have your men search every room, every trunk, every mousehole. Somewhere in this house is the answer, and somewhere also is a packet of documents that did not vanish into thin air. Outside, the rooks wheeled and screamed against a sky the color of wet slate, as though the house itself were crying out a warning no one heeded. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The search began at noon and lasted until the light failed. Sergeant Beddoes and 2 constables turned Braidwood Chase inside out with the methodical thoroughness of men who know their promotion depends on finding something. They found plenty. In Dr. Trevelyan's wastepaper basket lay a torn scrap of notepaper. When pieced together, it read, in her cool, angular handwriting, "Cannot forgive the cyanide betrayal. Must end it tonight." The word cyanide had been underlined 3 times. Dr. Trevelyan, shown the fragment, lifted one eyebrow. I was drafting a letter to a colleague about wartime experiments with hydrogen cyanide as a signaling agent. I tore it up because it was no longer relevant. Draw your own conclusions, Monsieur Poirot. In the soft earth beneath the cipher room window, the gardener discovered a single set of footprints, deep in the heel as though someone had stood there a long while. Size 9. Captain Carver wore size 9. Captain Carver, confronted, laughed. I often smoke under that window. The ivy smells sweet after rain. Last night? No, I was losing at patience in the smoking room. Ask the cards. They'll tell you I cheated no one but myself. In the library grate, half-consumed, lay the corner of a letter in Miss Blaine's looping schoolgirl hand. These surviving words were, "If he announces it tonight, Felix and I are ruined. Rather die." Miss Blaine turned scarlet, then white. It was a letter to my aunt in Torquay. I burned it because it was silly and hysterical. I did not kill my guardian. Professor Kessler's room yielded a small leather case containing a hypodermic syringe and 3 glass ampules marked with a skull and crossbones. The professor sighed. Potassium cyanide solution. For destroying diseased laboratory rats when I worked at Porton Down. The seals are intact. Check if you wish. Mrs. Marchbanks, when her keys were examined, possessed a ring from which one key was missing. The brass tag read Cipher Room, Master. She met Poirot's gaze steadily. That key was lost in 1920, the week my husband died. Sir Reginald had the lock changed immediately. I never found the old key. Perhaps whoever took it then still has it. Finally, in Major Hawthorne's study, the wall displayed a vacant space where the Italian stiletto had hung for 7 years. The Major's face darkened. I noticed it missing yesterday morning. Thought one of the maids had taken it for cleaning. Clearly I was wrong. By tea time the house reeked of suspicion. Every clue pointed neatly at someone, yet none fitted the locked door. Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room as the grandfather clock prepared to strike 5. "My friends," he said pleasantly, "you have provided me with what the English call a positive embarrassment of riches. A note about cyanide, footprints, a burned letter, poison ampoules, a missing master key, a vanished dagger. It is magnificent. It is also too much." He placed the scraps and objects on a small table like a conjurer displaying his cards. "Observe, each clue accuses one person only, and each accused has an answer that is plausible. In a murder of this elegance, one would expect either no clues at all, or clues so subtle they are overlooked. Instead, we are battered with them. Someone, mes amis, is trying very hard to be caught." Captain Carver gave a nervous laugh. "You're saying the murderer planted false evidence against himself?" "Précisément. Or against others. The effect is the same. Confusion." Poirot picked up the torn note about cyanide. "Dr. Trevelyan's handwriting is distinctive, yet the pressure of the pen varies. The underlined word cyanide is heavier, as though traced over. Someone imitated her hand." He turned to the footprints. "Captain Carver's boots are size 9, yes. But the impressions show a nail pattern found only on the left boot. Your left boot, Captain, has no such nails. I examined them this morning. Someone wore your discarded shooting boots from the gunroom. The burned letter, the ampoules, the missing key, each under Poirot's gentle dissection, revealed the faint finger marks of arrangement rather than accident. Even the dagger, when compared to an old photograph of the Major's study wall, proved fractionally shorter in the blade. "A substitute," Poirot declared. "The original is still somewhere waiting." Professor Kessler removed his spectacles and polished them slowly. "Then we are back to the impossible," he said. "No real clues, only decoys. How was it done?" Poirot smiled, a small cat-like smile of pure satisfaction. "That, mon cher professeur, is what I intend to demonstrate." He requested every duplicate key in the house be brought to him. There were 8. None fitted the cipher room's Yale lock. "Curious," he murmured. "Sir Reginald changed the lock in 1920, yet kept no duplicate himself. Why?" Darkness had fallen. Lamps were lit. Outside, a wind rose, rattling the casements like impatient bones. Poirot asked Major Hawthorne to lock him inside the cipher room alone, exactly as Sir Reginald had been. The Major hesitated, then obeyed. The door closed. The bolt shot home with a metallic clang. The key turned in the lock from the outside and was removed. They waited in the corridor, 6 suspects and Inspector Japp, listening to the silence within. 1 minute, 2, 5. At the 7th minute came the soft scrape of the bolt sliding back. The key turned again from inside. The door opened. Poirot stood there, unruffled, a loop of black thread wound around one finger. "Impossible?" he asked gently. "Not at all. Merely a matter of understanding the habits of English locks." He held up the thread, a bent pin, a steady hand, and the bolt, which you will notice slides horizontally rather than vertically, can be drawn back from the corridor by passing the thread beneath the door. One whips it away afterwards. No trace remains. The door may then be locked from the outside with the true key, and the illusion is complete. Japp swore softly in admiration. Captain Carver's face was a study in dawning fear. "Then anyone could have—" "Exactly," Poirot said. "Anyone who knew the trick, and someone in this house knew it very well indeed." The wind howled louder, as though the house itself protested that its last secret had been stolen. Chapter 5. The Weight of What They Knew. The house did not sleep that night. Lamps burned low in corridors, doors stood ajar. Footsteps crossed and recrossed the upper landing like restless chess pieces. Poirot sat in the library until the small hours, the thread and bent pin on the blotter before him, turning the Italian dagger over and over in his gloved hands. The blade was too clean. Someone had wiped it with spirit of camphor to remove fingerprints, yet missed a microscopic smear near the guard. Blood certainly, but not Sir Reginald's alone. A second type, rarer. He made a note and closed his eyes. At 23 minutes past 3, a scream tore the night apart. It came from the library. They converged from every direction. Major Hawthorne in shirt sleeves, revolver in hand. Captain Carver barefoot, hair tousled. Miss Blaine, clutching a candle that guttered in her shaking fingers. Dr. Trevelyan already kneeling beside the fallen woman. Dr. Lydia Trevelyan herself lay sprawled across the hearthrug, one hand outstretched toward the desk. A bruise was rising purple on her temple. On the blotter lay the manila folder marked Traitor, Evidence, no longer empty. Inside was a single photograph. Sir Reginald Vance, younger, smiling, shaking hands with a German officer in the uniform of the Imperial Navy. On the reverse, in Sir Reginald's own crabbed script, I was the traitor. May God forgive me. The rest of you are innocent. Poirot arrived last, moving with the calm of a man who has been expecting exactly this. He knelt, felt the pulse, lifted an eyelid. She lives. A concussion only. Someone struck her from behind with the bronze Buddha from the mantel. He lifted the folder with tweezers, examined the photograph under the green-shaded lamp. A clever forgery, he announced quietly. The paper is modern, the ink fresh. Observe the watermark, 1926. Sir Reginald used only pre-war stock. And the handwriting. Note the tremor in the G's. Our murderer imitates a dying man's shake by holding the pen in his left hand. Dr. Trevelyan stirred, opened her eyes, tried to sit. I came down for aspirin, she whispered. Saw the folder on the desk. Opened it, then nothing. Who else knew you were awake? Poirot asked. No one. I was reading, heard a floorboard creak, thought it was the house settling. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The French windows were closed but unlatched. Rain had blown in, darkening the carpet in a semicircle. On the sill lay a single wet leaf. Beech, torn, not from any tree near the house. Someone had entered from the garden. Inspector Japp arrived, pajama-clad and furious. First a locked room murder, now assault and forged confessions. I'll have the lot of you in cells by morning. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mon ami. The second crime illuminates the first. He addressed the shaken circle. Someone wished us to believe Sir Reginald was himself the traitor of 1918. Why? Because the real traitor fears the true documents more than death. They are still in this house, and our murderer believes Dr. Trevelyan had found them. He turned to the doctor. What did you truly discover tonight, doctor? She hesitated, then reached inside her dressing gown pocket and drew out a small key. Brass, old-fashioned, the twin of the one that had hung around Sir Reginald's neck. I found this taped beneath the drawer of his desk an hour ago, she said. I recognized it at once. It opens the wall safe in the cipher room. Sir Reginald always said there was only one key. Clearly he lied. A ripple passed through the room. Poirot took the key, weighed it in his palm. Then tomorrow, with Inspector Japp's permission, we open that safe. And perhaps we learn why a man invited death into his house rather than carry one more secret to the grave. Dawn found Poirot in the cipher room again, alone. He stood before the small steel safe let into the paneling beside the fireplace. The key turned sweetly. Inside lay a thin packet wrapped in oilskin. He did not open it. Instead, he closed the safe, pocketed the key, and went in search of breakfast. At 10 o'clock, the house party assembled once more in the morning room. Rain still fell in gray curtains. Dr. Trevelyan, pale but composed, wore a silk scarf knotted to hide the bruise. Poirot entered carrying the oilskin packet. "Before we proceed," he said, "a small experiment." He asked Mrs. Marchbanks to fetch the household accounts ledger from 1918. When it came, he opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. "Observe the ink. Pre-war, iron gall, now almost brown. The forged confession was written in modern chemical ink that will never fade thus. Elementary." He laid the packet on the table. "These are Sir Reginald's true memoirs. He intended to read extracts at midnight, then hand everything to the authorities. The traitor could not allow that." Major Hawthorne's voice was hoarse. "Then open them. Let us be done with it." Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. Because last night someone tried to substitute a lie for the truth, and in doing so revealed himself more clearly than any confession." He looked slowly around the room, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. The forger needed fresh ink, modern photographic paper, and, most important, access to a specimen of Sir Reginald's left-handed writing. Only one person in this house possesses all three. His gaze settled on Professor Otto Kessler. "You, monsieur. Your laboratory at Porton developed the very ink used in the forgery. Your darkroom provided the photographic paper, and you alone knew that Sir Reginald, after his stroke, learned to write with his left hand. You kept specimens, did you not, for graphological study?" Kessler's face was a mask. "Speculation," he said softly. "No. Certainty." Poirot produced a sheet from his pocket. "This morning I found traces of silver nitrate on the cuffs of your dressing gown, a photographer's chemical. You entered through the French windows last night, planted the forgery, and struck Dr. Trevelyan when she surprised you. The wet beech leaf on the sill came from your shoes. You walked across the lawn from the old potting shed where you have your dark room." Kessler's hand dipped into his pocket. Japp's revolver was out in the same instant. "Hands where I can see them, Professor." Kessler smiled, a thin, tired smile. "You are clever, little man, but not clever enough. The documents you hold are worthless. The real traitor burned them months ago." He lunged, not at Japp, but at the fire. Poirot was faster. His cane caught Kessler across the shins. The professor fell heavily. In seconds, Japp's handcuffs clicked shut. As they led him away, Kessler looked back once. "Ask your precious doctor why she really came to the library last night," he said. "Ask her what else she found." Dr. Trevelyan met Poirot's eyes without flinching, but something moved behind the cool facade, something very like fear. The rain kept falling. The house, for the first time in 9 years, felt almost clean. Chapter 6. The Little Gray Cells. Stir the library fire had been laid anew, but the room still carried the faint iron smell of last night's violence. At 9 o'clock precisely, Poirot entered, closing the double doors with a soft click that sounded in the strained hush like the cocking of a pistol. Every chair was occupied. Inspector Japp stood beside the mantel, arms folded, face thunderous. Professor Kessler sat slightly apart, wrists in steel cuffs, yet with the serene detachment of a man who believes the game is already lost and therefore cannot wound him further. Poirot did not sit. He placed a small Morocco leather notebook on the table, rested both hands upon his cane, and regarded them all with the gentle, implacable gaze of a surgeon about to cut. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, voice silky, "we have reached the moment of truth. 2 nights ago, Sir Reginald Vance was murdered in a room locked and bolted from within. Last night an attempt was made to convince us that he himself had been the traitor of 1918. Both acts were committed by the same hand. No, I correct myself, by 2 hands working separately, each ignorant of the other. A duet in murder, if you will. Rare but not unknown to Hercule Poirot. A ripple stirred the room. Dr. Trevelyan's fingers tightened on the arms of her chair. First, Poirot continued, the method, the locked room defeated us only because we accepted the honesty of the bolt. In truth, the bolt was drawn from the corridor with a thread, simple, childish even, yet it served. The door was then locked with the true key and the murderer departed. 10 minutes later, Sir Reginald, discovering the betrayal of his precautions, wheeled himself to the door to shoot the bolt again. At that instant, the real assassin, waiting in hiding, struck from behind the open door with the stiletto. The dying man fell forward, the door was closed, the thread withdrawn, the key turned from outside. Perfect illusion. He paused, letting them picture it. Yet the murderer made one mistake. The dagger was wiped with spirit of camphor, a hospital smell. Only one person here still uses camphor in the old way to ease rheumatic pain in a shoulder wounded at Passchendaele. Major Hawthorne. The major rose slowly, face ashen. You think I... Sit down, mon ami, Poirot said kindly. You are guilty of nothing but loyalty. You killed Sir Reginald to prevent him naming the true traitor. You believed it was Captain Carver, ruined by debt, who had sold the codes to pay his gambling losses. You acted from patriotism, misguided but noble. You even left your own dagger on the wall as substitute, hoping to shoulder the blame yourself if necessary. Touching, but unnecessary. Hawthorne sank back, eyes glittering with unshed tears. The second crime, the forged confession, the attack on Dr. Trevelyan, was the work of Professor Kessler. He wished us to believe Sir Reginald guilty because the real documents would have exposed not a British traitor at all, but a German one. Kessler himself. In 1918, he was already a double agent. He fed Germany just enough to maintain credibility while protecting British secrets. Sir Reginald discovered the proof only last month, letters in Kessler's own hand hidden since the armistice. Kessler killed to keep his reputation, perhaps his life. Kessler shrugged. A pretty story. Where are these letters now? Safe, Poirot said simply. But we no longer need them. Because the true danger, the knowledge Sir Reginald intended to reveal at midnight, was far worse than any single traitor. He opened the oilskin packet taken from the wall safe and drew out a thin sheaf of typed pages. These are not about 1918. They concern May 1917. A British hospital ship, the HMHS Glendower, was deliberately sent unescorted into a U-boat ambush off the Scillies. Over 400 wounded soldiers and nurses perished. The Admiralty needed American outrage to force the United States into the war. Sir Reginald, as a munitions contractor, sat on the secret committee that approved the sacrifice. He kept the minutes. For 10 years, remorse gnawed at him. He intended to publish everything and face trial if necessary. The silence was absolute. Every person in this room lost someone on the Glendower, Poirot said softly. Major Hawthorne, his younger brother. Captain Carver, his fiancée, a Queen Alexandra nurse. Miss Blaine, her parents, both doctors aboard. Mrs. Marchbanks, her only son. Professor Kessler, his wife, a volunteer orderly. And Dr. Trevelyan. He turned to her with genuine pity. Dr. Trevelyan lost no one, because she already knew. She was the Admiralty liaison who delivered the false sailing orders to the Glendower that night. Sir Reginald's deputy, young, brilliant, trusted absolutely. The minutes name her clearly. Lydia Trevelyan rose in one fluid motion. In her right hand was the small pistol she had carried since the war. "Stay where you are," she said calmly. "I will not hang for doing my duty." Poirot did not move. "Duty, Doctor? 412 souls for a diplomatic gesture?" "They were dying anyway," she said, voice flat. "The war was bleeding England white. America had to be brought in whatever the cost. I signed the orders. I have lived with it every day since. She looked at the others, Hawthorne rigid with shock, Carver white to the lips, Daphne Blaine weeping without sound. I came here to stop him publishing. When the Major killed him first, I thought I was safe. Then, Kessler muddied the water with his forgery, and I realized the minutes were still in the safe. I retrieved them last night, struck myself with the Buddha to create confusion, planted the forged photograph. Childish, perhaps, but it almost worked. She raised the pistol to her own temple. Poirot's voice cut like a whip. No, you will not escape by the easy path. You will stand trial and tell the families why their children died. For a moment, the room balanced on a knife edge. Then Jap moved, swift as a terrier. The pistol spun across the carpet. Beddoes pinned her arms. She did not struggle. Only the ice in her eyes shattered. Later, when the police cars had gone and the house stood echoing and empty, Major Hawthorne found Poirot in the cipher room, staring at the bloodstain no sawdust could quite erase. I killed an innocent man, the Major said bitterly. You killed a tormented one, Poirot replied. Sir Reginald invited death. He told me so himself. In a way, mon ami, you granted his wish. He placed the oilskin packet on the desk. The minutes will be published. The truth at last. Perhaps that is the only justice left. Outside, the rain had ceased. A weak sun touched the ivy, turning it briefly heartbreakingly gold. Poirot adjusted his hat, drew on his gloves, and walked out into the pale morning. Another case closed, another scar on the little gray cells, and somewhere very far away a ship that had never reached port sailed on through his dreams forever. Chapter 7. Justice served. The house felt hollowed out, as though the storm of the last 3 days had scoured it clean of every lie it had ever sheltered. Servants moved on silent feet. Doors that had banged and creaked for years now closed with the soft finality of coffin lids. Outside, the weak November sun climbed higher, but its light seemed reluctant to cross the threshold of Braidwood Chase. In the morning room, the fire had been allowed to sink into gray ash. Only 2 people remained of the original circle. Major Alistair Hawthorne and Hercule Poirot. The others were gone. Dr. Lydia Trevelyan and Professor Kessler to separate cells at Buckinghamshire Police Headquarters. Captain Carver to London with a sergeant who would not let him out of sight until the gaming debts were settled honorably. Miss Blaine to her aunt in Torquay with a police matron and a heart that might never mend. Mrs. Marchbanks to the cottage in the village she had kept since her husband's death, paid for by Sir Reginald's guilty conscience. The Major stood at the window, staring out at the sodden lawns as though he expected to see the ghosts of hospital ships drifting across them. I keep thinking, he said at last, voice rough, that if I had waited 1 more minute, just one, Sir Reginald would have told us the truth himself. I murdered a man who was trying to confess. Poirot, seated very upright in a tapestry chair, laid his cane across his knees. You murdered a man who had already condemned himself, mon ami. He summoned me not to prevent murder, but to witness it, or its consequence. In his own way, he chose you as executioner. You gave him the clean death he believed he did not deserve. Hawthorne turned. You are kinder than the facts warrant. Facts are stupid things, Poirot replied. They require arrangement. Come, sit. There is brandy. You will need it. The Major obeyed, sinking into the opposite chair as though his bones had turned to lead. Poirot poured 2 glasses from a decanter that had survived the upheaval untouched. To the dead, Poirot said quietly, raising his glass. May they finally be at peace. They drank. The silence stretched, companionable yet heavy. Presently Hawthorne spoke again. What will happen to the Glendower papers? They will be published. The Prime Minister has been informed. There will be questions in the House, resignations, perhaps a royal commission. Many reputations will not survive. But the families will know why their sons and daughters never came home. That, at least, is justice. And Lydia Trevelyan? She will be tried. The charge will be murder. The forged confession and the attack on herself were part of concealing the original crime. Whether the jury believes she acted from patriotism or fear is in the hands of God and 12 Englishmen. Professor Kessler will hang. His treason is uncomplicated. Hawthorne stared into the brandy. I still see the dagger going in. I still feel the shock when he fell forward without a sound. I thought I was saving England. You were saving the England you believed in, Poirot said gently. We all do terrible things for love. A motorcar crunched on the gravel outside. Inspector Japp appeared in the doorway, hat dripping. Car's ready, Poirot. They want you at the yard this afternoon. Statements, the usual nonsense. Major, the chief constable, sends his compliments and says no charges will be preferred against you. Self-defense of the realm or some such rot. Unofficially, of course. Hawthorne managed a wintry smile. Tell him I would prefer the rope. Japp shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, orders are orders. Poirot rose, buttoning his overcoat, adjusting the angle of his hat with care. Before we leave, one last matter. He crossed to the mantelpiece and took down a small framed photograph none of them had noticed before. Sir Reginald in 1914 younger, standing beside a hospital ship with a proud proprietor's smile. On the back, in the same crabbed hand that had written the forged confession, were the words, "To those who paid the price." Poirot slipped it into his pocket. For the families, he explained, a beginning. They walked out together through the great hall. The suit of armor that had stood guard for 3 centuries seemed to watch them go with empty pity. At the foot of the stairs, Poirot paused, looking up at the gallery where Mrs. Marchbank's husband had once hanged himself. Major, he said quietly, you will sell this house, yes? As soon as decently possible. Good. Turn it into a convalescent home for those who came back broken. Let the walls learn a different kind of silence. Hawthorne's eyes filled. He held out his one hand. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You owe me nothing, Poirot said, taking the hand warmly. We are both Belgians in a foreign land, you and I. We understand about debts that cannot be settled with money. The Daimler started with a cough of blue smoke. As they swept down the drive, Poirot looked back once. Major Hawthorne stood alone on the steps, straight and solitary, the empty sleeves stirring in the wind like a flag of surrender. Poirot settled into the cushions. Drive on, mon cher Japp. London awaits and Miss Lemon will have 50 letters demanding attention. One returns always to order. Japp glanced sideways. You all right, old cock? You look as if you left something behind. Poirot's eyes were distant. I left many things, my friend. 412 souls who will never grow old. A man who believed patriotism could justify anything. And another who discovered too late that it cannot. He removed his gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them in his lap. But chiefly I left the illusion that knowledge is safe. It is not. Knowledge is the most dangerous thing in the world. That is why some secrets must be dragged into the light, noisily screaming no matter the cost. The car turned onto the main road. Behind them, Braidwood Chase dwindled, red brick swallowed by ivy until it was no more than a bruise against the pale sky. Poirot closed his eyes. In the quiet of his mind, he could still hear water closing over a hospital ship that had sailed on orders signed by a brilliant young woman who had never imagined the weight of 412 names. Somewhere, very far away, the sea kept its own counsel. Chapter 8. The Cipher That Lied. 3 weeks later, on a bitter December afternoon when the Thames lay dull as pewter under a sky the color of wet cement, Hercule Poirot sat alone in his flat at Whitehaven Mansions and opened a parcel that had arrived by registered post. No return address, only the faint postmark Portsmouth HM Dockyard. Inside was a single sheet of foolscap folded twice and a smaller envelope sealed with green wax. The sheet was covered in neat columns of 5-letter groups apparently meaningless: FJXKD, QWPMR, YTBHL, GNVEU, etc. At the foot, in ink that had browned with age, someone had written, Monsieur Poirot. If you read this, I am dead or worse. The cipher is Playfair, keyword Glendower. Trust no one, not even the Major. Forgive me. L.T. Poirot recognized the handwriting at once. Dr. Lydia Trevelyan. The seal on the inner envelope was the Admiralty crest. He sat very still for a long moment, then reached for his decoding square. The keyword Glendower produced plain text with merciless clarity. The document was not a confession, it was a detonation. In measured icy sentences, it detailed how, in May 1917, the Admiralty, with the knowledge of the War Cabinet, had sacrificed the hospital ship not once but 3 times. The first sinking had failed to provoke America. 2 more ships, unmarked, had been sent into the same Wolfpack corridor within 6 weeks. Over 900 lives in total. Sir Reginald Vance had chaired the secret committee. Dr. Trevelyan, then 28, had been the cipher officer instructed to falsify the sailing orders and then to encrypt the true minutes so that no trace remained in ordinary records. At the bottom, in her own hand, she had added, I burned the carbon copies in 1919. I thought the secret died with me. Sir Reginald kept his own set, enciphered differently, hidden behind the cipher machine in the wall safe. He intended to publish only the single Glendower sinking. He never knew the full measure. If he had opened the false back of the safe, he would have found this. I could not let even half the truth emerge. Better one monster than the Empire itself. Poirot laid the deciphered sheet on his blotter as carefully as if it were nitroglycerin. So the locked room had contained 2 safes. The obvious one in the paneling, holding the partial confession he had found, and a second concealed behind the great Remington cipher machine bolted to the desk, holding the complete indictment. Dr. Trevelyan had removed the second packet during the confusion after the murder, substituted her forged photograph in the empty folder, and struck herself to create an alibi. He rang Scotland Yard. Jap was out. He left no message. Instead, he took a taxi to the Old Bailey, where Professor Kessler awaited transfer to Pentonville and the gallows. The warder allowed Poirot 10 minutes. Kessler looked up from his narrow cot, thinner, the scholarly dome of his forehead yellow under the gas mantle. You come to gloat, little Belgian. I come to offer you life, Poirot said quietly, and laid the deciphered sheet on the table. Kessler read in silence. When he reached the end, his hands shook. Mein Gott, 912, not 400. Exactly. You believed you were silencing a personal accusation. In fact, you helped bury the greater crime. Kessler laughed, a cracked sound. And now you will trade my testimony for a commutation? Clever. No trade, Poirot said. Only truth. You will hang for the murder of Sir Reginald Vance, that is just. But you may choose whether the world learns that a German spy died to protect the British Empire's dirtiest secret. That choice is yours. Kessler stared at the wall for a long minute. Give me paper, he said at last. I will write what I know. The full cipher key, the false back of the safe, everything. Let them hang their own heroes. Poirot provided the paper. The pen scratched for 20 minutes. When it was done, Kessler handed over 3 closely written pages. Tell the hangman to make it quick, he said almost gently. I have kept worse company than him. That night, Poirot dined alone at his club, eating nothing. At 11, he walked to Westminster Bridge and stood watching the black water slide beneath him. The following morning, he delivered Kessler's statement and Trevelyan's cipher to the private secretary of the Home Secretary, with a covering note in his own hand. Some truths are too heavy for any one nation to carry alone. Publish or burn, but do not pretend they never existed. H.P. 3 days later, a brief paragraph appeared on an inside page of the Times. Professor Otto Kessler, convicted of the murder of Sir Reginald Vance, was found dead in his cell yesterday morning. He had opened the veins of his left wrist with a shard of spectacles. No foul play is suspected, no mention was made of any documents. In the spring of 1928, the Admiralty announced that certain great war records had been lost in a warehouse fire. Questions were asked, answers were vague. The matter died quietly, as such matters do. Poirot closed the file he had marked merely Glendower and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath the unsolved cases he could not bear to look at every day. Years later, when Hastings returned from Argentina and asked whatever became of the Braidwood Chase affair, Poirot only shrugged. A storm in a teacup, mon ami. Much noise, little rain. But sometimes very late, when the fire burned low and the London night pressed against the windows, he would take out the green-sealed envelope that had never been opened in public and read again the 912 names Dr. Trevelyan had written on the back in her neat, merciless hand. Then he would pour a small glass of crème de menthe, raise it to the darkness and whisper the old Flemish prayer for the dead who have no graves. Outside, the city went on forgetting. Chapter 9. The Reconstruction. The night before Professor Kessler was due to hang, Hercule Poirot returned alone to Braidwood Chase. The house had been shut up since December. The windows were blind, the great front door chained and padlocked by order of the executors. Poirot had obtained the key from the solicitors with a note so delicately worded that refusal had been impossible. He let himself in at 10 o'clock. The air inside was cold and thick with the smell of damp stone and extinguished fires. Moonlight fell in pale bars across the hall, striping the suit of armor like prison bars. He did not switch on the electric light. He carried instead a single candle in a silver holder, the flame trembling as though it already knew what it would have to witness. He walked the length of the west corridor without hurry, past the blank faces of locked doors until he reached the cipher room. The broken lock had been replaced, the new one turned, sweetly under the solicitor's key. Inside, nothing had been moved. The desk stood where it had always stood. The green-shaded lamp still waited. The bloodstain on the carpet had darkened to a near black rose. Poirot set the candle on the desk, exactly where Sir Reginald's lamp had been, and began. First he took from his overcoat pocket a length of black thread and a bent pin, the same ones he had demonstrated weeks earlier. He knelt, passed the thread under the door, looped it around the bolt, and with a gentle tug drew the bolt home. The click echoed like a verdict. Rising, he wheeled the heavy invalid chair, borrowed from the attic and painstakingly dusted, to the precise spot where Sir Reginald had died. Then he placed upon the seat a tailor's dummy dressed in one of the dead man's old suits, the shoulders padded to the correct bulk, the silver speaking tube draped across the lap. He stepped back and studied the effect. In the candlelight, the dummy looked uncannily like a man waiting for death. Now the difficult part. From an inner pocket he produced the true stiletto, the original Italian blade, recovered from the cistern of Dr. Trevelyan's bathroom where she had hidden it after substituting the shorter copy. He weighed it in his hand, feeling the perfect balance, then moved to the exact place behind the door where the real murderer had stood. He raised the dagger. For a long moment he did not move. The candle flickered, Shadows leapt across the walls like guilty memories. Then very slowly he reenacted the blow, not striking the dummy but letting the blade pass through the air where the living throat had been. He felt the resistance that would have been there, the slight jerk as steel met flesh and cartilage, the sudden weight as the body slumped forward. He whispered the words Sir Reginald had never had time to speak. "Forgive me, all of you." He withdrew the dagger, wiped it on a silk handkerchief exactly as the murderer had done with camphor, and laid it on the desk beside the empty traitor folder. Next, he opened the great Remington cipher machine bolted to the corner of the desk. Its false back, revealed by Kessler's last confession, swung aside on concealed hinges. Inside lay the oilskin packet Poirot had himself removed weeks earlier. He took it out, opened it, and spread the enciphered pages beneath the candle. One by one, he deciphered them aloud, his voice soft but relentless. HMHS Glendower, deliberate exposure, though estimated loss acceptable. HMHS St. David, second decoy. HMHS Lanfranc, third and final. 912 names read in order took a long time. When he reached the final name, Sister Mary Benedicta O'Rourke, age 22, his voice cracked for the first time. He folded the pages again, returned them to the safe, and closed the false back. Then he performed the last act. From his waistcoat he drew a small silver whistle, the kind used by referees at football matches. He put it to his lips and blew one short, piercing blast. Somewhere in the dark house a door opened. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, slow, deliberate, the measured tread of a man who has not slept properly in weeks. Major Alistair Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, thinner, eyes sunken, the empty sleeve pinned with painful neatness. "You knew I would come," he said simply. "I knew you would need to see it finished," Poirot replied. Hawthorne entered, looked at the dummy in the chair, at the dagger, at the candle burning lower. "I have dreamt this every night," he whispered. "Only in the dream I arrive in time to stop myself." He moved to the desk, touched the folder with one finger. "She sent me a letter from Holloway," he said. "Trevelyan. Said the full truth would destroy whatever faith the country has left. Asked me to burn the second packet if I ever found it." He met Poirot's eyes. "I came tonight to do it." Poirot said nothing. Hawthorne's hand went to his pocket and came out holding a box of Swan Vestas. For a long minute the two men regarded each other across the candle flame. Then Hawthorne struck a match. The flare lit his face, ravaged, honorable, utterly lost. He held the flame beneath the corner of the oilskin packet Poirot had deliberately left half protruding from the safe. The oilskin blackened, curled, and went out. Hawthorne dropped the dead match, ground it beneath his heel. "No," he said, voice raw. "Let them choke on it." He turned, walked to the door, and paused. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for giving me the choice." He was gone. The echo of his footsteps faded into the vast, listening house. Poirot waited until the candle had burned down to a stub, then extinguished it between finger and thumb. In the darkness the room felt lighter, as though a long-carried weight had finally been set down. He locked the door behind him, posted the key back through the letterbox as agreed with the solicitors, and walked out into the frosty night. Above him the stars were sharp and cold and very far away. Somewhere among them, he thought, 912 new ones had been added tonight. And for the first time in many weeks, Hercule Poirot felt the little gray cells at peace. Chapter 10. Justice in the Library. Spring came late to London in 1928, as though the city itself were reluctant to wake from the long nightmare of Braidwood Chase. On the last day of April, Hercule Poirot received a plain envelope at Whitehaven Mansions. Inside was a single sheet of War Office notepaper and a railway ticket, third-class return to Portsmouth Harbor. The letter was brief and unsigned, the handwriting firm, official, unmistakable. The packet will be opened tomorrow at noon in the Admiral's Library, HMS Victory. Your presence is required. Come alone. Poirot recognized the hand. He had seen it on too many death warrants and pardons. He traveled down by the 9:15 from Waterloo, sitting very upright among sailors and dockyard workers. His small valise on the rack above containing only a clean handkerchief and the green-sealed envelope that had never been opened in public. At Portsmouth, the air tasted of tar and salt and hot iron. A launch waited at the Sally Port, flying the white ensign. The coxswain saluted and said nothing for the entire crossing. On the Victory's quarterdeck, an admiral waited, tall, stooped, the left breast of his uniform ablaze with ribbons and strangely empty of the one decoration that mattered. Behind him stood Major Alistair Hawthorne in civilian mufti, face thinner than ever, eyes steady. The admiral did not offer his hand. "This way, Monsieur Poirot." They descended the companionway to the lower deck, past the spot where Nelson had died, past glass cases of blood-stained relics, until they reached the small stern cabin known as the Admiral's Library, oak-paneled, low-beamed, smelling of linseed oil and centuries of secrets. On the table lay the oilskin packet still sealed with the original wax. Beside it stood a brass ship's lantern, a cut-glass decanter of brandy, and 3 glasses. The Admiral closed the door. "Before we begin," he said, voice like gravel under a keel, "you should know that the king has been informed. Certain papers will disappear. Certain others will be placed in the archives against a day that may never come. The service looks after its own, even when they are monsters." He broke the seal with a penknife. The minutes of the secret committee spilled out, thin sheets, faded type, the Admiralty watermark still visible. The Admiral read them aloud in a flat, remorseless voice. Every name, every estimated casualty figure, every cold calculation of political advantage. When he reached the final page, he stopped. "Dr. Lydia Trevelyan was reprieved yesterday," he said. "Life imprisonment, no public announcement. The hangman will not have her. Professor Kessler is already dead, as you know. The service prefers its scandals quiet." He looked at Hawthorne. "Major Hawthorne has resigned his commission and will leave England within the month. A rubber plantation in Malaya has need of a man who understands silence." Hawthorne inclined his head. Neither acceptance nor refusal, simply acknowledgement. The Admiral gathered the papers, placed them in a metal deed box, locked it. "This box goes into the strong room beneath the Admiralty building. The key will be melted down. In 200 years, perhaps, some historian will open it and wonder why we did what we did." He poured 3 glasses of brandy. "To the dead," he said, raising his. They drank. The brandy was fierce, medicinal, honest. Then the Admiral did a surprising thing. He took from his pocket a small enamel badge, the hospital ship's own insignia, a red cross on white, and laid it on the table. "For the families," he said, "the only decoration any of us will ever wear again." He saluted, not Poirot, not Hawthorne, but the empty air where 912 ghosts stood in invisible ranks. Afterwards, they walked the upper deck in silence. The harbor was full of gray ships, their ensigns snapping in the wind. Gulls wheeled overhead like scraps of torn paper. At the gangway, the Admiral paused. "You could have published, Monsieur Poirot. The newspapers would have paid a fortune." Poirot adjusted his hat with care. "Hercule Poirot does not trade in the blood of children. There is a justice that belongs to courts, and another that belongs only to God. Tonight they are in accord." Hawthorne accompanied him back to the launch. On the gunwale, away from listening ears, the Major spoke for the first time. "I burned my own copy of the minutes," he said, "in the library fireplace the night you let me choose. But I kept one page, the page with my brother's name. I will carry it to Malaya, and when I die, it will be buried with me. Someone somewhere will read it one day. He held out his hand. Poirot took it. Adieu, mon brave. Plant your rubber trees. Marry, perhaps. Let the jungle grow over everything. Hawthorne's grip tightened. And you? I? Poirot smiled, a small, sad smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I shall return to London and arrange my ties by color. Order is the consolation of the aging. The launch cast off. As victory dwindled astern, Poirot saw the Admiral still on the quarterdeck, rigid at the salute, the hospital ship badge pinned now to his uniform where no medal had ever hung before. Back in London that evening, Poirot dined alone at his favorite table in Soho, eating nothing, drinking only a glass of tisane. At 11, he walked home through streets washed clean by spring rain. In his flat, he opened the bottom drawer, took out the file marked Glendower, and placed inside it the railway ticket, the Admiral's unsigned note, and a single red and white enamel badge he had palmed from the table when no one was looking. Then he locked the drawer, turned the key twice, and slipped it into the pocket of the waistcoat he would wear tomorrow. Some justices are too large for courts or newspapers. They live instead in small, silent gestures. An empty sleeve that no longer needs to hide. A badge worn in secret, a page carried to the other side of the world. A drawer that will not be opened again in one man's lifetime. Outside, London settled into ordinary night. Inside, Hercule Poirot wound his watch, arranged his dressing gown just so, and allowed himself the rare luxury of tears that no one would ever see. The case was closed.